Hi, welcome to Punchline Talks, the budget special. I'm Mark Owen. Each week I invite a panel of business and civic leaders to review the morning papers. And this week we're going to review the budget. And of course, we'll be picking out the best of the stories for Punchline of the week as well. I'd just like to say a big thank you to our wonderful sponsors, Hazlewoods Accountants and Business Advisors. And Glenn Callimore is here from there as well today. So a big hello to Glenn. Okay, let's meet the panel. So I just introduced Glenn. He's the director of Hazlewoods and he specialises in tax. We've got Mark Hawthorne. He's the ex-leader of Gloucestershire County Council for the Tory Party. Sam Holliday, the business development manager for the Federation of Small Business for Gloucestershire and the southwest of England and forever. Ex-editor of the Bath Chronicle. And finally, never last not least, we got Ian MBE. He's not wearing his stripy suit today. It's a bit disappointing. Is a director of Business West, ex-editor to the Citizen, Echo, Western Daily Press. Have I missed any papers, Ian? Probably
No,
loads. Probably
no,
loads.
that's fine.
Okay, right. Let's see what's making the headlines today, guys. Woo! It's a budget. Can you all see that? The Guardian.
Yeah.
Reeves told she will have to raise a further 9 billion for public services, says the Guardian. The Sun, a kick in the bollocks. I think it says it all. The Daily Mail, Reeves tax raise to cost charities 1.4 billion a year. The Times, soaring cost of sickness claims, says the Times. The Metro, 400 victims of Al Fayed. The Mirror, trapped in a nightmare of the Spanish floods. And that's all the papers have at the moment. Okay, let's go over to the panel. I'm going to start with you, Mark. What have you picked out from the papers for us? Have you gone with the budget or have you gone elsewhere?
No, so I thought we were going to talk about the budget later on, so I thought I'd go elsewhere. And there were two stories that caught my eye this morning. The first one on the Daily Mail, and it's quite poignant, I guess, because last night I was there opening the door every 5 minutes for the trick-or-treaters. I think we got through 2 fun bags worth of Maltesers and whatever else I think we had in there. But and then the first thing I see this morning are the Christmas adverts are starting to come out. But the one that caught my eye was Sainsbury's, I have to say, with the BFG and the reunion with Sophie. Sainsbury's, I think, have not had a good run of Christmas adverts. I think they've been fairly unmemorable for a number of years. But this one, I think, has pulled it out of the hat. It really has. So it's a great little advert. It almost brings a tear to your eye. It's fantastically well done with Stephen Fry in it as well. I think it's going to be one to beat, if I'm being brutally honest. It's a bit early for my taste. I have to say I like to have a little bit of a break between Halloween and before we go straight into Christmas. But fair play to Sainsbury's. I think that is one that's definitely put the bar high for the rest of the competition out there.
So for you, it's a ho, ho, ho and not a no, no, no. Has anybody else seen the advert very quickly? Is it Sam, ho, 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 or a no, no,
I've
no?
not seen it yet. Not seen it at all.
Okay, we'll move swiftly on then. Mark, what's next?
Must be my algorithms. But anyway, there you go. And the second story, which is actually on the BBC website, which is, I'm sure some of you have seen this, is the Jimmy Logan, the hat-trick scorer from the 1894 FA Cup. Extraordinary story, and that really does highlight the difference between where football was at its beginning and where it is now. And this is a guy who's the only second person ever to score a hat-trick in an FA Cup final. It was described as Logan's final. It was, a massive win for Notts County. This guy ended up dying not shortly afterwards, got buried 200 miles away from where he's lived. He had no headstone, and for nearly 2 decades, nearly 2 centuries, nearly a century and a half, sorry, he's laid forgotten. And the Notts County fans have run a fantastic campaign to track down where he was buried and get a headstone placed there. I just think it's an amazing story. It's fandom at its best for footballers. I do think that football fans sometimes get a bad rap. I think actually sometimes they are pretty amazing at keeping their club history alive. But secondly, it just really goes to show the difference between footballers then and footballers now. It's a great story on the BBC and definitely worth checking out.
Okay, thanks ever so much for that. Sam, I'm going to go over to you next. What's your pick of the papers?
Well, I will just mention Mark and mention the FA Cup there. I talking about real grassroots football. I'm travelling up the M5 tonight to my hometown Tamworth, who are in the first round of the FA Cup. So it's a big night for them. They're playing Huddersfield. So I'm looking forward to that. I know we were going to talk about budget, so I'm avoiding that. But I couldn't. I mean, we in Gloucestershire know about flooding. I personally know about flooding. My house flooded in January. The work isn't still complete. So, but the scale of what we've seen in Spain, some of the images that are in all the papers, is unbelievable. I mean, the thing about if it's global warming that's causing it, it's happening in the most unlikely places. I mean, the sheer force of nature was absolutely stunning. And every story that you read about this, every photo is more shocking. And I think we're already at 160 people that have died, and I think it's going to be a lot more. So I think that's really, really worrying. The second one, slightly lighter, but maybe not. 3 weeks ago, I was in New Zealand. It's where my daughter lives, and we went over there, one of these lifetime holidays, an absolutely brilliant time. And I come back this morning to read in the Times, the Times rugby correspondent, pompous hacker is bullying, get rid of it. There's a bit of an attack on the New Zealand team for doing the hacker. Absolutely stark raving mad. We talked about football then. Anyone will know the moment you start winding up the opposition, you just make them tougher. So if the New Zealanders want any motivation for playing England tomorrow, I'd put that headline in the dressing room. They're having a go at our hacker now. They're having a go at our heritage. They're having a go at our culture. Ridiculous. So if England lose tomorrow, I blame this Times headline. There you go.
I just want to say, I wondered how long it was going to take you that you'd been to New Zealand, but there we go. It only took you like 5 minutes, but very good. Glenn, let's get you in on the action, mate. What have you picked out for Punchline, please? Not for Punchline, the pick of the papers.
So I have stuck with a budget. I thought that was the idea. What can I say? So I'm going to go with the now very familiar Ms. Reeves there, which probably, unless you're close to politics, I suspect maybe a year ago you might not have actually recognised that photograph. So I've just picked up some analysis in the Guardian. That is, there Reeves told she'll have to raise further 9 billion to avoid UK public service cuts. And what I find particularly interesting about this article is it's more on the. I'm a tax advisor, not an economist, so it's almost news to me, really. So the point they're making, that they're saying there, is that the cost of borrowing for the government is going to increase as a result of this. And looking at the tax analysis, I struggle to understand why that would be. Why we sort of started to talk about the markets being upset, just as we did with the disastrous mini budget of however long ago that was. And actually the issue is, it seems to be, surprisingly, they're suggesting she's not spending enough. While 70 billion of spending sort of strikes me as quite a high figure, bearing in mind they were trying to finance 40 billion from the budget, that seemed to be ridiculously high. So it seems quite a surprise that they're suggesting there isn't enough spending going on. And one of the things they're suggesting in the Guardian, that's going to threaten the fact that the Treasury wants to reduce borrowing costs, mortgage interest and all that kind of thing. Scheduled currently 5%, scheduled to fall to not scheduled, hoping to fall to 4.75%, and then maybe 4% by the end of the year. So I find it quite fascinating that our concern is they're not spending enough. And that particular headline on the 9 billion was that there are certain public services that haven't been protected. And if they don't want to see a fall in service levels, then there's going to have to be yet another 9 billion, probably from a later budget.
Well, and where is that going to come? They can't give the business community any more kick-ins. We're all stuffed out already, but we'll come to that in a second. Right, thanks ever so much for that, Glenn. Come on, Mr. Mean. What have you picked out from the papers?
Well, I'm sticking to the budget and then one other story. Budget to me is summed up, Mark, by Fraser Nelson, who's former editor of Spectator in the Telegraph today. He writes this: seldom has a budget come apart so quickly. And I think that's exactly what's happened, because if you look at the lead story in the Telegraph, their headline, markets turn on Rees over tax burden. Glenn's just mentioned the 9 billion. She's going to be coming back for more. That's something the Daily Mail are looking at. And they're also leading on the line about charities. Reeves' tax raid to cost charities £1.4 billion a year. I love the Sun, a kick in the bullocks. They did quite a good job yesterday on Reeves and pumpkins, but this is a classic Sun story. But a story that's away from the budget is a very good story, which in normal times without budget would be getting a huge show. This is in the Daily Mail. Car finance mis-selling scandal is the biggest since PPI. This is a big story because some car dealers, and I think Honda is one of them, are actually stopping selling cars on forecourts. This is all about monies that were paid to car salesmen. And that's a story that's going to run and run.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, right. Thanks ever so much, panel, for that. Let's talk about the budget because it's the budget special, and I'm very excited about it. Mark, we're all going to go round. We're all going to pick one key issue or one key take from the budget each. So, Mark, I'm going to start with you. What's the one thing that's pulled out for you?
Well, I think national insurance, you've got to go with that. It's £25 billion raid into businesses. But the forgotten story, of course, is also £25 billion raid into public services. Public services pay NI. Now, the Treasury, if you dig really deep into the documents, has made vague promises about protecting public services from the NI raid because it is effectively wooden dollars. But the reality is, and we've been here many, many times before as a sector, it won't be able to capture it all. And actually, we're already seeing the stories that Ian referenced. One of you referenced the £1.4 billion that charities and GPs potentially have already flagged up they're going to be hit with. Councils are going to be hit with the same. They've got massive supply chains. The one that really does worry people is the care sector, which is a very fragile sector, full stop. Care home finances are always very, very in the balance. They're going to be hit massively by this one. And the government isn't going to be able to capture all that additional cost. West Streeting yesterday was saying that, well, you've got an extra £600 million for social care. Well, actually, I think you'll find it's probably one of the lowest settlements for additional funding into social care we've had for 5 years. So there is a real risk that the NI bombshell is going to keep on rolling. And that actually, the more we dig into it, the more parts of the public sector, as well as the private sector, are going to find this absolutely devastating. It is, I think, at the end of the day, the largest tax raid in modern times. And we can come back later to talk about the whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, but the repercussions will keep on rolling. And from a political optics point of view, from a government that was already struggling to maintain a positive image in the story, this is just another to capture that phrase on the front page of the Sun, another kick in the bollocks for many within the public sector as well.
And there's reports in the papers that care homes will close. They just will not be able to afford to carry on. Okay, let's talk about national insurance contributions then. I'm going to go to you, Sam. Obviously, you deal with all the small enterprises. What's your kind of take on that particular issue?
Well, it is obviously the key issue, but I think I'm going to try and put a little bit of balance here because I know that a lot of small businesses might be thinking this is really going to hit us as well. The main thing the FSB would have been calling for was an increase in the employment allowance, which protects smaller businesses from paying national insurance at all. And they made the point that they've doubled the employment allowance, that 1 million small businesses will pay less or not at all. So I wanted to put that as balance because I think everybody might think they're going to be paying more. However, the fact is, it is very confusing. And I think people like Glenn and Hazlewoods and all the others are going to be very, very busy because I watched the budget with a chip shop owner and a hairdresser, and they were mentally trying to calculate whether they fell on this side or whether they're going to be paying more or less. And I think that, you know, until we delve deeper, and Ian referenced, you know, the budget coming apart, until we delve deeper, we won't know the full implications. But I did want to say straight from the top, a lot of businesses, 1 million, aren't going to pay any more. However, those that are going to take a big burden. I mean, I was at a business show in Gloucester on Tuesday morning at the rugby club, and I've never known so much nervousness about a budget. I've got to be honest with you, a lot of businesses don't really talk about it very much. You think they do, but they don't. But everybody was like talking in very low tones, and it was even referred to as the B word by one person. They couldn't even believe I could say it. That's how nervous people were about it, and I don't think it had done any positivity. And that's the one thing that is really lacking in business now, whether you're a self-employed sole trader or you're a big business. There's no confidence out there. It's flat. We've done all our surveys, Business West, FSB, loads of people. We've done our surveys, and confidence is fragile. And I think we were all looking for something on Wednesday that would kind of help lift the spirits a bit. But all I'm seeing is negativity. So as a PR exercise, it was a bit of a disaster. I watched Rachel Reeves on the news yesterday morning, and she was asked, some people are going to get hurt by this. You must know there'll be consequences. And she actually said, yes, there will be consequences. And the consequences will be, because someone said to me, well, who cares if the bosses have to pay more? Well, the workers of the bosses should care, because they're not going to be able to give you a decent pay rise. They might not be able to take on the extra member of staff that will make it easier for you to do your job. And they may not invest in that extra product. So there's no doubt about it. Business is paying the burden. £40 billion of taxes has been raised. 25 billion is going to come from business. So it's not good, but I have to stress again, employment allowance means that 1 million businesses are still protected.
And Sam, prices will have to go up. You've got to pay for the. It goes without saying, if prices go up, that means inflation goes up, and the government will have to borrow more money. It's obviously I'm going to come to Glenn at the end because we get the figures maybe from Glenn. Ian, let's bring you in. National insurance contributions. What's your take on it?
A jobs killer. Sam is right. I mean, all our surveys of Business West say that there's a lack of confidence in business. They want stability. Where is the good news here? There's a word that I do like, and that Labour kept its their mantra: growth. I couldn't see anything in this budget that really gave us any sort of growth. And I was just looking at the Daily Mail here on their business pages. A story I'm very interested in about the mini nukes, the SMRs, which we hope are going to be built at Albury and Berkeley. Miliband told to speed up mini nuke delivery. There was nothing there, Mark, that said this is a great story for the Southwest or Gloucestershire. I heard lots of detail about rail lines in the Northwest, Manchester and the North, in great detail. Nothing for us. Do we exist as the Southwest? Mark will have a view on that. I don't understand it. There was one mention of Southwest Aerospace, and then the next geographical mention was Derby, Manchester North. What are we doing here? And it leads us to, in my view, the thought that, look, this is all about being devolved, and Mark will have a view on this. Monies flow into places like Bristol and whatever, where you've got elected mayors and there's a sense of devolvement. So, I think great disappointment, but where is the growth? Where's all that going to come from?
Okay, brilliant. Thanks ever so much for that, Ian. Glenn, let's go to you. You're the money man amongst us. What's your take?
Yeah, so I thought, well, given that we were talking about national insurance there, I thought maybe I'll just throw some numbers at it then, which I sort of, just to give some context maybe, rather than any sort of political commentary. So just as a reminder then, national insurance, the increase was for employers. So in theory, employees aren't affected, but people might suggest they are. And so employers' national insurance is 13.8%, or it was. Proposal is it's going to go to 15%, an increase of 1.2%. The particularly important point that Sam pointed out there is there's something called the employer's allowance, which means that you don't pay all of your employer's national insurance. Let's just say that previously you got a deduction of 5,500 quid. It's now increased to £10,500, which means that while on the one hand they're taking away, on the other hand they're giving. So just to put some context to that, what I did was I just did some little calculations to work out if somebody was earning £30,000 a year, because that's just a little bit above minimum wage or a bit above minimum wage, what would that cost to that business be as a result of having that person on board? And the exact number is £866, so it costs an extra £866. I thought to myself, perhaps I shouldn't have used 30,000. Maybe I should have used 35,000 because that's the average wage, according to Statista. But actually, that only makes a difference of 60 quid. So it doesn't actually make a huge difference anyway. So if we were to put that in the context of having given back a little bit with the employers and that allowance, I think roughly speaking, if you've got 5 employees earning £30,000 a year, you're neither better or worse off. So you, as you can tell there, you're small employer with a few part-time people, or the odd, a combination of full-time and part-time people on, relatively low wages is no better or worse off. Somebody with a couple of employees is probably going to be slightly better off, not enough to make a huge difference. Of course, anybody with, I think we quoted somebody earlier on, I think you said maybe 50, 60 employees, clearly huge difference. I mean, the employer's allowance goes no way towards that. And so
Well,
in terms
Glenn, sorry, I was talking to someone yesterday, and in the papers it says each employee with national insurance is something like £2,500. Now, if you've got £2,500, and you've got 150 staff, that's an
yeah,
additional
yeah,
£375,000 you've got to
yeah,
find off
yeah,
your bottom line. How are you going to do that? I
yeah.
just don't understand. So you're going to have to put up your prices.
You'll either have to
And it
put up
goes
your
very, sorry, Glenn.
prices. Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, absolutely. To maintain profits at the level they're at, then you would have to put up prices. And the other criticism, of course, is that while it's not a tax on the working person, that will mean that they'll be less inclined to provide pay rises. Given at the moment where wages inflation is actually higher than CPI at the moment. So at the moment, employees are doing okay. I'll just say that outside the public sector, of course. But there'll be a very good reason to match pay rises to CPI now, won't there? So you won't. I'd imagine employers will start to rein that back in if they know that they've got a budget for a bigger number. And probably finally, I'll just add that bear in mind that for businesses, employers' national insurance is actually tax deductible. So it's for a company, then actually it's slightly diluted. You're getting a 25% saving, but of course you do actually have to be making money in the first place for it to be helpful that you get a tax deduction. If you're in a sector which is perhaps struggling and breaking even, then maybe that isn't actually quite so attractive. The fact that you get a tax deduction because you're just kicking it down the road and it's not really saving you anything.
Going to be very interesting how the unemployment figures looking around 6 months' time. Okay, thanks ever so much for that, Glenn. We talked about that in great length because it was the biggest hit. So I'm going to go to you, Sam. What's your pick of it? You can't have national insurance. We're going to do a little bit tighter on time, please. What's your take, apart from national insurance contributions, obviously?
Well, to be honest, that was it. That was the main one. I mean, there is some stuff about business rates. I mean, there was a big fear that we were going to lose the 75% relief for all retail and hospitality. We're not losing it completely. It's going down to 40%. So that's still a drop. That's still a drop, but at least we're keeping that. There's a small thing right at the end, and sometimes you don't always pick up on it about shoplifting, because a lot of small businesses. So there's no point reporting crimes when people shoplift because they're not going to investigate. Well, the government's saying that's not going to happen in the future. That does put extra resources on the police, by the way, but at least it's a note of intent. So I think the national insurance has been such a dominant issue that some of the other stuff hasn't been unpicked, which is why, interestingly enough, that Sun headline, and I heard it on the radio yesterday, farmers are very angry about this budget. And that was like a one-line thing in the budget that I must confess, one in one ear and one out of mine. But I've looked into it, and there's some bad stuff in there as well. So I think you're right. I'll look forward to the Sunday press, I think, by which time we should have all the analysis we need to get where we are. But it was a mixed bag, Mark. It was definitely a mixed bag.
Okay, let's go over to you. Thanks ever so much for that, Sam. Ian, what's your one other take?
Investment. I remember Tony Blair. Do you remember he said education, education, education? Reeves was saying invest, invest, invest. I agree with that. That's the way to growth. But how many firms are actually going to do that with the background we have here? I can't see that at all.
No. Okay, thanks, Mark. Anything you want to add to that before I go back to Glenn's?
So I think business growth is one that really worries me, because I think this was a party that got elected on the concept that we need to grow the UK economy. I think there's clear consensus that our growth has been very sluggish. The first thing that happens in the Treasury document that went alongside this budget is all the growth predictions for the next 5 years were downgraded to some fairly anemic numbers now. We are literally just hovering above zero. And then you whack in this massive tax rise, which they have obviously clearly taken into initial account. But you've got to say, I think I agree with Ian. This is a tax on job creation as much as anything else. And I think it is going to have a greater impact on the wider economy than even the Treasury thinks. But also it's the way the government then started to unpick some of the extra levers that help drive growth. And Ian's absolutely right. There was no mention of the Southwest. I mean, I think there was a throwaway line where she said from Cumbria to Cornwall. And that was about it. And even Bristol did not get a huge mention either in the budget or in the actual budget document as well for getting extra any special deals with the devolved mayor. There was very little in Bristol's deal. There was a bit of a rollover on something that had already been agreed. But the biggest killer for me is that they're then cutting all the support that they provide locally to support business growth. So the LEP funding, which was clearly ran the local LEPs, was transferred to the local authorities last year. That's gone. So they're either expecting hard-pressed councils to continue to fund all that staff or activity, or they've literally just pulled the plug on all that activity. And I think this is absolutely the wrong time to be doing that. And the second thing is they've just pulled the plug on Western Gateway. This is a pan-regional economic partnership that's designed to support growth in the Southwest, and they have literally just pulled the plug. So this is not only a budget that has delivered tax burdens that are going to stifle growth, they've then dismantled all of the mechanisms in place to support local business in growing. Look, I'm a conservative, so I'm going to say this was not a great budget, but even I was flabbergasted by how far they went and how much they didn't seem to understand some of the basic mechanics of how the UK economy works.
Okay, I'm going to bring Ian in because I know, Ian, you're a big fan of the Gateway. A lot of people didn't get it. I always thought it was a bit of a quango myself, but I can see the merits of it. But what's your take on that?
I think a pan-regional operation from Swindon now to Pembrokeshire is too much. Far, far too much. I have to say, there are some very, very good people there. John Wilkins, the guy who heads it up, is very good. But I know they were saying they had funding for the next year. I fear for them. Mark said it's a done deal. I'm not sure that's absolutely right. If you look at the budget detail, they actually say that it's being looked at. I didn't know it was actually finalised.
Oh, it's one of those, Ian, just to clarify, it's one of those lovely things where the government knows it wants to do something, but in order to protect itself from being JR'd, it's going to consult. So it's a done deal. Everyone you talk to says it's a done deal.
I mean, Mark, we have had great support from Western Gateway in Gloucestershire. The LEP has now gone into the county council. Mark, Sam and I are going to sit on that economic growth board. We hope that we can have influence there. But the big situation is this to me. If you start getting rid of operations like Western Gateway, where is the support, the real support at the top of government for business? This is all about supporting business.
Let's be honest, Ian, they don't understand business. That's what this is about. I'm very sorry. I just don't see how they can understand business. I just want to go back to this, what you said about the LEP stuff then. Has the money gone that was given to, that replaced the LEP when he went into? So what will happen to the likes of the guys that got cheated in?
So Jeremy had passed that money over to local authorities when that transfer took place. And what we were waiting for was a confirmation that would be continued or rolled into our grant, our settlement. That's the way it normally works, because effectively it's a new burden. The government has asked us to undertake new activity that we are not previously funded for. The announcement in the budget is really, really clear that the government is going to stop that funding. It's going to take that funding out, which means that councils will be left either to fund that activity for itself. And I think for Gloucestershire, from memory, I think the bill is about £1 million for that activity, or they're going to have to cut it. And I'll tell you now that there'll be a lot of hard-pressed councils up and down the country. I don't know what's going to happen in Gloucestershire that will go, we're not getting the funding for this. We can't maintain this level of staff. We're going to cut back. And the things that will suffer as a result are the things around business engagement, around all of that activity that really does make sure the voice of business is being listened to by local decision makers. And that will all go. And the fear, of course, is that what they actually want to create are these mega mayors. But the population size they're now talking about for a mega mayor is 2 million. You know, I mean, you'd have to consume most of the southwest to get to that figure. This is big government on a big scale, and what's going to be lost out is those local connections. Let's forget we would have never had Barclay and Albury without Western Gateway. They're the ones that, with Business West, helped drive that project to where we are today, and that all of that's just been cut away.
Okay, Glenn, I'm going to bring you in. What's your take on all this? I mean, Ruth Dooley's on the. Is she still chair involved, isn't she?
Yeah,
Hazlewoods.
yeah. I thought that question was excellent, by the way, that you raised them, because I was trying to work out what was going to happen if there was what's happening with the funding, because I was assuming it was just going to continue, or which is what we all assumed, I think, wasn't it, back at the start of this, that it would continue, albeit under a slightly different banner. I understand. Well, from speaking to Ruth, actually, I would hope that maybe Gloucestershire is in a slightly better position than some of the other authorities, on the basis that I gather, I'm told, that we aren't quite so bad for funding due to some things that are going on in the county. But absolutely true that those organisations really launch business and really help communication. I mean, so. I wonder if we'd have even met Mark if there wasn't for the likes of Ruth and that organisation, you know, making these things happen. And so it's not just good for actually promoting business, but also for actually making sure there's a network of people that are able to support and provide, you know, influence and commentary. So I think probably the feeling of it's got a feeling of independency about it, the LEP, so, or did have. So, you know, what a shame for it to vanish away and just and drain off.
I'm going to bring Mark back in. Sorry to pick on you, Mark, because obviously you only recently stepped down as leader of Gloucestershire County Council. So you can say, will they have the money? Would they have a budget of £1 million that they could continue without government money? What's your take on it?
I genuinely don't know. I think for the short term, I'm sure every effort will be made to continue to support economic activity. So I think there will be, you're absolutely right. Gloucestershire is still getting that incinerator dividend, which is very rare. But if you look at the forward 4-year plan, you know, things just continue to get tough. You know, the main thing for upper tier authorities like Gloucestershire County Council is social care. And that is a demographic time bomb that continues to grow.
Yeah.
The other thing it's also worth reflecting on, there was a lot of talk about local government reorganisation in here as well. So if you throw that into the mix, a lot of people think that saves money. Go and talk to Somerset. That has not saved them any money at all. That has left them in a financially very difficult position. So there are a lot of things in this budget, I think, create a lot of uncertainty locally around what's going to be left in place, not only from a local authority point of view, but from a business support point of view.
What about
Mark,
the growth? Sorry, I just want to bring growth hubs. Sorry, I just want to bring in the growth hubs, because obviously they're all split out into different entities running under the universities and colleges. So they're still funded, aren't they? They're going to be okay for the time being.
I don't know, Mark. I genuinely don't know, because I mean that again was part of the funding that we got from government. And again, we're going to have to pick through the details. But you know, the budget line clearly says that the government is minded to not continue funding for LEP functions, and that is part of the mix. So there is a real question mark as to whether or not some of this can be sustained going forward. Now, some of them are self-sustaining, and some of them are looking at a sort of a membership model to go forward. But you know, this is a big question mark. But the key thing for me is, you know, there's always been a presumption that local councils and local businesses and local economies will get support from central government to have the conversations that help drive local growth. And as far as I'm concerned, every single ounce of funding that goes in from central government on this has just been stripped out.
Well, but Ian, let's bring you in.
Mark, there really is, for what I can see, no industrial strategy whatsoever with the government currently. And the other thing to say is that we are extremely lucky in Gloucestershire to have hitherto had confidence of the government to get into place some big projects like the 417, a lot of money But I think there's still perhaps a big question mark on some of the monies for Junction 10 now. And I keep asking about that. And that could be a disaster. But, you know, to have growth and to have the sort of things that Mark has talked about, we need a proper strategy that we can all buy into and be aligned to. I can't see that happening here at all. So we have to do it ourselves.
I've always thought sorry, I'm just going to bring. I've always thought the greatest thing about the LEP and G First LEP was the way that actually it brought all the different sectors together, and everybody. And you don't find this in Bristol or other counties where the business community itself is very, very well connected. You know, and people know each other. You know, and I think that's from the G First. Unlike Business Link years ago, that just didn't work. Growth hubs have been fantastic. I wish I had a growth hub when I started my business. I'd probably be twice as big or maybe twice as fat. I don't know. But anyway, it's just bollocks. Let's be honest. The sun has hit the nail on the head. Glenn, final thing on the money side of stuff. I'm going to bring you back in on that. Have you got anything to add cash wise, or is it just?
Actually, if you don't mind, I'm gonna quickly talk about the plight of farmers as a result of the changes. So I was just quickly scribbling some numbers down there while we were talking. So one of the major changes in tax for farming is that there's a relief called agricultural property relief from inheritance tax. What this means is if you're a working farmer and you want to pass that business on to your next generation, when you pass away, you do it inheritance tax free. Sounds perfectly common sense, allows the business continue, into later generations. What was changed was that I'll just restrict it to this agricultural property relief. The most relief you can get is £1 million. So a million. So your farm is protected for £1 million. For any value above that, it's taxed at 20%. Now, on the outset, you say, wow, £1 million, that's a heck of a lot of money. Well, that's probably about 100 acres of farmland. Well, 100 acres is a pretty small farm. So just scribbling some numbers down. If you had 500 acres of farm, which is pretty normal sized farm, not ridiculously large, that would mean that on death, then the inheritance tax charge would be £800,000, which would need to be paid by the farm or the estate of the deceased. Say, let's call them mum and dad, to pass it on to their kids. Or that would probably mean they'd have to sell 80 acres of their farm to be able to fund the inheritance tax, to be able to pass what's left over to the children. So you can probably imagine that we had a very busy hotline yesterday because we specialise in agriculture and estates. And there was a lot of people very, very worried about that.
Well, you can see what Jeremy Clarkson said, isn't it? Whatever
Absolutely.
you do, survive the next 5 years. Look after yourself, live long enough to see out this government, and they won't hopefully change it. They just don't get the countryside. Let's be honest about it. Goodness gracious. Okay, we're going to run out of time, guys. We are over anyway, but I don't care. But let's do the pick of the punchline. Let's do the pick of the punchlines now. Shall I start with? I tell you what, very quickly, I forgot. Good or bad budget, but I think I know which ones. Glenn, good or bad budget? Yes or no?
I hate people giving me absolutes. Bad then because of the farmers.
Ian, good or bad?
Bad for business.
Sam?
I'll say bad for most business.
Mark?
Bad for the economy.
I'd say bad for the Labour Party as well. But there we go. That's my
got
take.
4 years, Mark. If you've got a government, Mark will know this better than I will. You get your bad stuff out in your first year. There've been 4 years time. Could be very different.
My best buddy in Sweden, I shouldn't mention his name, David Overall. I've been friends with him since I was 9, and he reckoned that Starmer wouldn't last a year. I'd just like to say that I did bet him £100 that Starmer would last longer than a year, and that also that Donald Trump wouldn't win the American election as well. So fingers crossed for the fifth for me. Anyway, let's not move into that. It's a completely different ball game. Right, pick of the punchlines. I'm going to go back to you, Mark, because you might have to dash off. What's your story of the week? And I think I know what it's going to be.
I do. It's your breaking news around the closure of the old C&G building, Barnwood 1, as I remember it being called. I spent 14 amazing years working for C&G and then Lloyd's TSB. Started off in Barnwood too, so I was in the shed next door to Sainsbury's, but I got to the big building eventually. And for me, it's iconic Gloucester. That building has been around for so long. For those of us who are lucky to work inside, it was an amazing building to work inside. It was opulent beyond opulence, it has to be said. And it's just a crying shame that it's going, because it really was an icon of Gloucester, of the local finance industry. But for me, it's got so many amazing memories. I'm going to miss it. I'm genuinely going to miss it. Maybe they should open it up for all us old C&G folk to go around for one final time before they shut it down for good.
I'll tell you one thing. I'd just like to say that you did actually invite me there years and years ago as well, and showed me around. As I know that Ian also went there, but no. So that's your pick of the punchlines today. Is the Lloyd's built? Lloyd's going. Sad day. No voluntary redundancy as well. I just want to chuck that into the mix. Okay, Sam, what's your pick of the punchlines, please?
Well, actually, two things, both of which have been mentioned, but are worth reiterating. I thought your budget coverage was brilliant. You did videos with right, left, and centre, and no other local press did that. I heard from Alex McIntyre within minutes of the budget. I thought, wow, that's impressive. So well done for your budget coverage. And the second one is that Lloyd's story. I mean, I don't think we should underestimate. I know people have worked there as well. What a big move that is for some people. Now, not everyone are going to be moving. Some people are going to be moving from home. But 40 miles, and Bristol's also, bear in mind, got a scheme where if your car is a bit older, you'll have to pay extra money to drive into it. There is a good train service to Bristol, but it's still a massive, massive upheaval. So there's a human side to this story as well. But it's also very sad, like Mark was saying, because it is quite iconic. You first see that building, you go, wow. Admittedly, the Lloyd's building in Bristol is pretty spectacular too. But to lose that one in Gloucester is a great shame.
I just want to add, actually, what was I going to add? I just want to say about the budget. Because she ran over, it was literally Alex and I running to catch up together. Because
all credit to him really, because he didn't know the line at that point.
Yeah, no, that's very true. If only I'd done it a little bit later, we'd had a bit more in-depth knowledge of it. But that's the beauty of doing it when we did it. I hope anybody noticed that I changed my waistcoats as I went along to represent the different colours of the parties that I was talking to. Goodness, Mark,
I'm going to have to sign off, but it's been great.
You're a star. I would love to catch up with you about that funding thing for the LEP stuff. Okay, let's. Ian, okay, thank you, Mark. Pick of the punchlines, Ian.
Well, same story, really. Why do I pick that? It's an exclusive story. It's an iconic building. And, you know, I'm an ex-editor who believed all the time in exclusives. It was a Daily Mail training, and that's why you're doing so well. That's a great exclusive. And the second one was the Julian Duncan stuff in Cheltenham. So, yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
That's very kind of you. Thanks ever so much, Ian. I shall give you some figures for it in a second. Glenn, what have you picked out from this week's punchline, please?
Oh, I've gone quite different. So I've stayed away from any politics or budget. I've gone for your insight into Adidas sees growth on back of a retro revival. It caught my attention firstly because I, rather embarrassed to say, I didn't even realize Adidas was a German company till about 2 weeks ago when one of my kids told me. I guess having having grown up with it, I did, obviously from that era, I just assumed it was America. Never thought anything about it. And particularly because having teenage sons, that retro revival is something I'm witnessing firsthand. And often my sons are pouring through eBay to find old sports tops and sportswear. So that retro revival, I think, is quite interesting. And so hence that was my favourite.
Okay, my pick of the punchline has to be the Lloyd story as well, followed by Julian Dunkerton. It was a great pleasure to spend some time with him, and he really did give me plenty of time as well. That, unfortunately, is all we got time for. I'd just like to add that Lloyd story, and thank you what you said about exclusive. That was so far that Lloyd story has had over 700 shares on Twitter alone. That's 700 just from that site, let alone the others. Our Facebook site the other day was 186,000 it reached. 186,000 for last month. Okay, thanks ever so much, my wonderful panel. I'd just like to thank them all. I'd also like to thank our very, very kind and generous sponsors, Hazlewoods Accountants and Business Advisors. And finally, not last least, that's not the right way you say it, but I have been up rather early. I'd just like to thank all of you for watching. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll be back again next week. But until then, remember, please, it's all in the punchline. Bye.
Goodbye.